British agent who works with the Mossad when necessary, Michael S. Goff, who had Mossad agents feeding him information and directing him while he worked with his Lebanese Muslim partners in PNAC. Now, why would a young American lawyer working with a good law firm in his hometown suddenly leave the practice of law and work with a dodgy startup software company owned and financed by a Lebanese and a Saudi? Goff's family is a well-respected and well-known family in Worcester, Massachusetts. After law school, he had it made at the law firm. Why the sudden career change? It is clear that Goff is one of several 100,000 Sayanim, and he was tapped by Mossad to do a quick career change for the good of the Jewish people and Israel, of course. Under Goff, PNAC software loaded with trapdoors and Trojan horses was sold and loaded onto the most sensitive computer systems, which subsequently failed miserably, or performed well, depending on your view, on September 11th, 2001. Goff's father and grandfather, Samuel, were accountants who belonged to Worcester's Commonwealth Lodge 600 of B'nai B'rith. They were both 32nd degree Masons. But PNAC wasn't the only software firm that was involved with the massive breakdown in communication on 9/11. Because the attacks involved systems used by the FAA, NORAD, and the U.S. Air Force, the conspirators would have needed super user access to the command and control centers of these three separate organizations. One such company is MITRE Corporation. Indira Singh, an IT consultant who previously worked on a Defense Advanced Research Project, or DARPA project, and who was employed by J.P. Morgan on 9/11 in risk management, pointed to MITRE's role at the FAA during the 9/11 Citizens Commission hearings in New York in September 2004. Quote, PNAC was with the MITRE Corporation in the basement of the FAA for 2 years prior to 9/11, Singh said. Quote, their specific job is to look at interoperability issues the FAA had with NORAD and the Air Force in the case of an emergency. If anyone was in a position to know that the FAA, that there was a window of opportunity or to insert software or to change anything, it would have been PNAC along with MITRE, unquote. The MITRE Corporation is a major defense contracting organization headed by the former Director of Central Intelligence, or DCI, which was none other than Dr. James Rodney Schlesinger. Schlesinger, who was reportedly made DCI at the request of Henry Kissinger in 1973, later served as Secretary of Defense. Schlesinger, a former Director of Strategic Studies at the RAND Corporation, was described in a 1973 biography as a devout Lutheran, although he was born in New York in 1929 to immigrant Jewish parents from Austria and Russia. Schlesinger earned 3 degrees from Harvard University. Schlesinger's father, an accountant, founded the accounting firm Schlesinger and Haas and was a trustee and chairman of the budget of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. His father was also a member of the New York State Grand Lodge of Masons. On 17th October 2001, Michelle Moad reported in the Mercury of Philadelphia that 2 men were caught by federal immigration authorities with detailed footage of the Sears Tower in Chicago, Illinois. The authorities described them as Middle Eastern men. Police arrived on the scene due to a call from Pizzeria Uno, a restaurant whose manager reported that the men had a tractor trailer and were dumping something described as a pile of furniture at the rear of the pizzeria. Of the 2 men, one identified himself as Moshe Almakias, age 30. This person fled the scene, according to police. The manager of the restaurant reported to the officers that the vehicle read Moving Systems Incorporated and included a phone number. The Middle Eastern man, later identified as Ron Qatar, age 23, exited the vehicle and said that the operator, 30-year-old Moshe Almakias, was across the street. He was spotted with a Jewish female, Eilert Reisler, aged 23, across the street, but she soon began to walk in the opposite direction of El Macias as soon as she was spotted by the police. When Reisler was apprehended, searched, and questioned, she was found to have a German passport in her name and medication in another. Getting back to El Macias, he stated that he didn't dump any furniture behind the restaurant and that he was on his way to a customer in New York. He was unable to provide either an address or phone number for the customer. When an arriving officer examined the vehicle, it was found to be in numerous violations and even not in safe working order and was subsequently put out of commission. The truck was, in fact, loaded to three-quarters capacity with household items, boxes, and furniture. Officer Gerald Swartz of the Whitpain Police Department found a video camera amongst the load. Plymouth police officer David McCann reviewed the tape and found that it had footage of Chicago, but suspiciously had numerous zoom-in shots of the Sears Tower. The three suspects were eventually questioned by the FBI and detained by INS. The Israelis were eventually released, but coupled with the antics of the dancing Jews that were caught on 9/11 and their front company, Urban Moving Systems, and these suspicious characters and their supposed moving company, is it possible that the plane that went down in Pennsylvania was intended for the Sears Tower in Chicago before the aircraft made an abrupt change of course over the state of Ohio?
Israeli Mossad terrorist operations extend to numerous countries. Here is just one example apart from 9/11 and others that we have briefly covered. As reported in La Voz de Altazan, two men posing as press photographers, one of them a former Israeli colonel and Mossad agent, were arrested inside the Mexican Congress on October 10, 2001, armed with 9mm pistols, 9 grenades, explosives, 3 detonators, and 58 bullets, but were released following intense pressure from the Israeli embassy. The report stated, "We believe that the two Zionist terrorists were going to blow up the Mexican Congress. The second phase was to mobilize both the Mexican and U.S. press to blame Osama bin Laden. Most likely then Mexico would declare war on Afghanistan as well, commit troops, and all the oil it could spare to combat Islamic terrorism." As reported in La Voz de Altazan, Los Angeles, Alta California. In a mind-blowing development, La Voz de Altazan has learned that the Mexican Army General Rafael Marcial Macedo de la Concha, who heads the Procuraduría General de la República, that's the Mexican Department of Justice, has released the retired Israeli Defense Force Colonel and presumed Mossad agent Salvador Gereksen Smeki, and Israeli illegal immigrant Sar Ben-Sevi, after both had penetrated the security of the Mexican Congress and were in possession of guns, hand grenades, and explosives. This morning, La Voz de Altazan had a personal telephone interview with Mexican Congressional Press Secretary Licenciada Adriana Lopez, and verified the arrest of two Israelis after they had entered through the highly secure front entrance of the Palacio Legislativo de San Larzo. She stated to La Voz de Altazan that the two terrorists had taken advantage of the situation that had occurred about 1700 hours of Wednesday, October 10th, when a large contingent of sugar industry unionists were entering through the metal detectors. The two Israelis followed about 50 of the unionists to the office of the President of Mexican Congress, Beatriz Paredes. The two Israelis were first pretending to be press photographers, but called attention to the sugar unionists because of their nervous and out-of-ordinary behavior. About 10 of the unionists confronted them and observed that they were carrying guns and what looked to them to be explosives. They held the two Israelis until official congressional security personnel took them into custody. The head of congressional security, Salvador Alarc, verified that the Israelis had in their possession 9 grenades, sticks of dynamite, detonators, wiring, and 2mm Glock automatics. Mexican Congressional Press Secretary Licenciada Adriana Lopez informed La Voz de Altazan in the telephone interview that Congressional Security then turned the terrorists Salvador Garrison Smeki, age 34, and Sara Ben Zebi, age 27, to the Procuraduras General de la República, Mexican Department of Justice, which is headed by Mexican Army General Rafael Marcial Mesado de la Concha. Initial reports